I've talked before about the importance of team morale, but I've never gone into very much depth on that subject. I'm going to describe what I find to be important qualities for team communication to have during tournaments, and some common pitfalls teams fall into that negatively impact their experience and their ability to win the game. I'm not sure to what extent this is useful as dating advice specifically, but it's definitely something to look for in other situations where people are working together in teams. The word I want to use to describe the overall mood you should be aiming to create is serious, but I'm immediately going to have to push back against a bunch of common connotations that people have with the word serious. Serious is not necessarily unfun or unfunny. Serious is not authoritarian. It is not angry. It is not bored. Serious is that you have a goal, and you're going to make sure to be focused on that goal when it's time to focus on that goal, and keep that focus until the goal is accomplished. You can still be upbeat while being serious. You can compliment your teammates on something they did well while being serious. You can still be lighthearted while being serious. The tone of your voice can be calm and friendly while still being serious. But what does need to happen is that when the game starts, we're talking about the game. Before the game starts, we're planning for the game. When the game ends, we're processing what happened and using that thinking to plan for the next game. During the game, all of our communication is about the game, not about something distracting. If we need a breather or something to lighten the mood, we can do that, but then we're going to refocus on the game when it's time for the game to start again. It's not cracking a joke that's the problem. It's that because you're cracking a joke, your team doesn't have time to talk about whether they're going for a Rainmaker pop or not. Now someone went for it, someone didn't, and we lost a player to the enemy team getting the pop, and now we're behind. Seriousness is also important because it's the best antidote to giving up on yourself and playing sloppily as a result. In my experience, both as a teacher and as a coach, I find that a lot of students use humor as a way to soften the blow when they're struggling with something and they mess up. It's a lot easier to crack a joke about how you're failing a class than to just tell someone flatly, seriously, that you're failing a class. Taken seriously, that kind of hits you square in the stomach. Whereas you can kind of feel like you've slipped the punch sometimes if you get someone to laugh about it instead. The problem is that you're not going to fix anything if you never take the problem seriously, not even when it comes time to fix it. It's only going to get worse that way. You're only going to make haphazard attempts to improve. You're going to accept failure instead of learning from it and growing past it. We learn from making mistakes. So if you don't have the seriousness to look at a mistake for what it is and decide you don't want to make it next time, it'll just keep happening. In Splatoon, you see this kind of behavior developing in a few different ways, but they all have the common theme that the priorities of the player shift from doing what it takes to learn and win the game to something else. Maybe entertaining their teammates with jokes, maybe finding some kind of hyper-specific achievement they can latch onto to feel like they were successful in spite of the fact that their team lost the game. Maybe swapping weapons so they can say, "You didn't beat me while I was playing my main." Whatever they're doing becomes more about protecting their own feelings than about helping their team accomplish the overall goal. This is much more common and understandable among younger, less mature players, but you will still see it a lot at all ages. Serious also means that you're maintaining a certain energy level. You're not bored, tired, or jaded, and you're not giving up on yourself. You're alert. You're present. You're not going to clench your fists and vibrate rigidly with tension, but you are going to put all of your effort into the game because that's what you're focused on. That's what you've been working toward. That's what your goal is, and you're prioritizing reaching it. High-level teams will often seem kind of intimidating to newer players while they're playing because of the way they'll just kind of bark orders at each other, yell about the game, keep up high intensity in their tone of voice on comms. In normal social situations, we don't just walk up to someone and command them to do something, let alone yell it at them. But in-game, in a situation where you need to communicate as much as possible in as little time as possible, and in a situation where someone's attention needs to be drawn to the correct thing as quickly and consistently as possible, urgency and imperative language are just going to become normalized. Most of the time, among those top-level teams, those teammates aren't angry at each other. A lot of the time, if you really listen carefully, they're more encouraging than anything. They just don't have time for pleasantries, and they're all on board and understand that. A lot of people, confronted with a situation where their team is losing, will flood the comms when they tilt by trying to find something to blame, invariably something other than themselves, of course, or maybe something that they don't really understand and they're just kind of saying words to have some kind of solution. That can hurt morale, but you'll almost certainly also have players tilt by falling silent and not saying anything at all, and that's just as important to recognize. This might happen due to insecurity in themselves, a lack of confidence that they know what to say or know how to fix the problem. And so at a certain point, they just give up on trying. This then is only going to be made worse when paired with the first kind of tilt, where the team is indirectly being blamed for the loss to save the first player's ego. That'll tilt the players who are internalizing and deciding that it is in fact their fault. But the silence can also be caused by a situation where the player feels like they do actually have the correct answer, they do know what's going wrong, and they just don't feel like saying anything about it is going to help. This comes from a lack of confidence in the ability of their teammates to take and apply feedback. Well, what's actually going wrong is so-and-so keeps running in before we have specials ready, but I've told him that before and he didn't take it well then. I don't want to start a fight in the middle of a tournament set, so there's not much I can say, my hands are tied. Maybe the player isn't giving up on themselves so much as they're giving up on the rest of their teammates by falling silent and avoiding the critical questions and confrontations. Back when I worked for Bravis, one of our products was a team building workshop where we had people play a cooperative video game together that required teamwork. In one of our sessions that we were doing for a business, we happened to have a couple of young women playing with their decades-older male boss, and that team was consistently underperforming. In observing them, we found that the women were playing at or above the average compared to their coworkers, picking up the mechanics of the game and executing them as smoothly as anyone else in the room. But that the boss wasn't anywhere near as familiar with video games or with using the controller, and it was distracting him to the point that he was also failing to keep up with learning the rules of the game. The only thing that was happening in conversation was the boss complaining about how the game was poorly designed, the controls didn't do what he expected. How is he supposed to do X, Y, or Z thing? Even as the women he was playing with were silently executing those techniques around him while he fumbled with his controller. Their working relationship was clearly getting in the way of them being a functional team in the game. In the workplace, those women might not have felt comfortable to contradict their boss. And as such, when they had information he didn't, that information wasn't being shared. It's absolutely possible to create an environment in which feedback and criticism are encouraged, where even someone at an entry-level position could tell the boss that he's doing something wrong, and he'd learn from that mistake and improve. But if there's an environment on the team where that feedback isn't welcomed, isn't taken to heart, is discouraged through a negative reaction, is disregarded on its face without consideration just to preserve the ego of the person being criticized, it becomes less and less likely for someone to come forward with criticism. It'll feel like the risk of the confrontation not going well isn't worth taking, since it's so unlikely to be rewarded by a positive behavior change. If, after a loss in tournament, you notice your team falling silent on comms for longer than usual, or if the only comms you're hearing are complaints, or if the callouts are coming less frequently, some combination of these problems is almost certainly happening. And it's something that will take a team conversation with some real emotional vulnerability to work out. If that conversation can't happen, chances are the team will end up disbanding. It will feel like a dead end, because problems will go unsolved for a long time, and other teams will be making progress while yours will flag behind them. As I've said, being able to navigate these situations takes some maturity. In the social circles of younger players, seriousness is discouraged. You can be made fun of, called cringe, for caring too much about something, for not letting people joke around and have their fun with it. The more people become independent of that influence from their friends, the more they become their own person who is confident in what they care about, the more willing they'll be to take something seriously and be effective in game. It's important to note that this transcends skill levels. Just because someone's got a 3k X power and plays for a high-level team doesn't mean they couldn't be doing even better if they stopped messing around during serious team practice with meme weapons. Sometimes teams get away with playing less seriously against much less skilled opponents and wear that as a badge of pride. But if you're looking to avoid developing bad habits and be more likely to win against teams at your own skill level, It's better to practice using your real strategies and playing as well as you can, so you don't practice sloppy mechanics or bad habits that hurt you further up the ladder. Don't settle for being better than a team you're already better than. Work to become better than teams that are currently better than you. Flexing on a team everyone knows you can beat is just a waste of your time that you could be spending learning and getting better. Best of luck to you resolving situations that are affecting team morale. They are complicated social situations that require a lot of emotional intelligence to navigate. But direct honesty, being willing to say something that's true for you in spite of your fear of the consequences, is the fastest path to learning and improvement. I hope you and your team are able to create an environment where people feel safe enough psychologically to engage and tackle issues like these, figure out how each other tilt, and support each other to make sure it doesn't happen when your best effort is most needed.